Hi, welcome to another Kintsugi Conversations. I'm Rob Balfour,
And I'm Neve Rose.
and on this episode we have Angie, who's coming all the way from Phnom Penh I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, Phnom Penh in Cambodia. And I've known Angie for nearly 25 years, I think. Angie was a very prominent part of the policy strategy development team at Rape Crisis all those years ago. So that's how we met and kind of conversations over many years about many issues about survivors. But I'll let Angie introduce herself and tell you a little bit about herself and where she is now, and then we'll get into conversations about activism, which is what we're here for. Over to you, Angie.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks, Neve. Yeah, I'm Angie. I've been living in Cambodia now for 12 years, working in women's rights, violence against women and children, and specifically doing quite a bit of work with an organisation called First Step Cambodia, who work with boys and mainly boys and girls who've been sexually abused, but also young people displaying sexually harmful behaviours as well. But yeah, I before I came, I did policy and strategy with Rape Crisis England and Wales for a number of years, working up from being a helpline volunteer in a local rape crisis centre. So, yep, got quite a bit of experience of, the movement in the UK and the lack of movement, I would say, here in Cambodia.
I'll just pick up on that. I mean, you were one of the kind of knowledge centres that I looked into many years ago, Angie, because you had so much kind of very clear insight about the situation we found ourselves in developing services for males and females. And, I learned a lot from you. I'm really glad we can have this conversation and kind of almost have a reflective lens back on that time, and then bring it forward to where we are now, and see whether the issues have really changed. I don't know if Neve wants to kind of say anything.
I mean, you kind of just mentioned about your work in Cambodia and the lack of, I guess, movement is, I think, what you were referring to.
Yeah.
How do you think that compares to the UK? I think we get quite like a westernized view of like the rest of the world in terms of like sexual violence. So it'd be nice to have like your kind of perspective from what it's like on the ground in Cambodia.
Yeah, it's very, very, very different in Cambodia. This is a country that is, in collective trauma. And even though, the Khmer Rouge was during the 70s, the country was liberated by Vietnam, but they ruled here for 10 years after the Khmer Rouge. And the politics and the way the country has developed has meant that there's been no reconciliation here. We had the tribunal, the Khmer Rouge tribunal, but it was, to a large extent, it was a farce. I think one or two leaders got imprisoned, and millions and very little reconciliation. I worked with a unit, working with the victims of sexual violence during the Khmer Rouge, to support them during the tribunal. And I worked, when I came here, I worked with an organization that worked on women's rights. It was young women, so women in their mid-20s to mid-30s. But they, some of them had lost parents. Many of them had lost fathers, either during the Khmer Rouge or after, through, sickness, ill health. And and their parents still lived in fear, and they had fear instilled in them as well. So, whilst there was a sense in 2012 when I came here of a democracy, some activism, there was also real challenges around freedom of speech and stepping over the line. And, a country in collective trauma, that's what I experienced. And after my first year here, this is quite painful to say, but I observed it as a country that had had a collective empathy bypass, which is something that happens in trauma. When you're all fleeing to the border camps over mines, you don't know whether you're going to make it. You're leaving people behind you, and you have to you're in survival mode, and that impacts on your whole being. Fortunately, I was working with human rights activists and was surrounded by them, unions, women's rights campaigners, people who were concerned about the well-being of their fellow man, people who had come back to Cambodia, who had fled when they're, in their late teens, early 20s, and had come back as adults, 36, to help rebuild the country. And, I think I was very lucky to be surrounded by those people, because that kind of kept my faith going, to be honest with you. But one of the things that I noticed, and at that time we had English newspapers, was that it would be reading about terrible crimes, against children and women, rape murders, of children. And my colleagues weren't really batting an eyelid, they're all using social media, they're all using Facebook. If those things were happening in the United Kingdom, and we'd had the rape and murder of that girl in India, and saw that, everyone out on the streets, no one was, none of all these young women activists I was working with, no one was posting about it, or I'd have conversations with them about it. And for 1 year, we decided that we would report every day on Facebook the sexual violence that we were reading about in the different papers, so we'd be trying to talk about it every day. But, I realized that there wasn't anything I was going to be able to do to shift the way people thought about this. And there was hope. I could see younger networks of young women coming up who were talking about rape, sexual harassment, stuff like that. For a little while, I explored, all of the development organizations that are supposedly working on violence against women and sexual violence. In Cambodia, I'd often take a consultancy just to go and sit in that office and see what they were doing. And none of it impressed, and I would go and talk to women who had started organizations to see if the sexual violence agenda could sit in their office, as part of their work. But eventually I walked away from that, from violence against women stuff. I walked away because it was so normalized. It was so, I just thought it's going to take another generation of younger people coming through with the social media, with the internet, But then on the other hand, they've got pornography. There is no sex education in schools, and pornography, hardcore pornography, is their sex education, And so I work with children displaying sexually harmful behaviours, and pornography runs throughout. in all of them, every assessment that we do, they're either exposed to it or they're searching it out or they're even addicted to it. Young children, 11, 12, 13. So, sexual violence wasn't in the violence against women strategy. We've got this massive contradiction, I suppose. On the one hand, Cambodian men use prostitutes a lot. A girl can't have sex before marriage, so her boyfriend is going out and actively using prostitutes. They're gang raping these girls as part of their social intercourse. And girls aren't educated here. The boys are educated, but the girls are expected to send the money home. So, the girls go and work in the garment factories, and it doesn't suit everyone being in that environment with the glue, and they're not nice environments, and so they often end up in the entertainment industry, karaoke's, the girly bars, whatever, and so obviously they're experiencing a lot of harassment and sexual abuse, but these are all taboo issues that the Minister of Women does not want to talk about or have in the violence against women strategies. So a lot of contradictions, a lot of contradictions, and eventually I've settled into this work. I do other things as well. I do, many different kinds of consultancies, but I've kind of settled into this work because it feels real. And again, it's changing lives one life at a time, one family at a time, so. Cambodia. Hey?
There is I think it's a Jewish expression, which is save one life, save the world.
Yeah, and these young kids are acting out with no context, no, often no parental guidance. They're so fearful. When we meet them, they're so relieved to meet us and to be able to talk about, these are, often, prepubescent or pubescent young men who have got no idea why their body is changing, why they're having these sexual urges. They've got no idea, nothing.
So do you think a lot of that stems from like the lack of sex education, combined with like the cultural taboos? So it's like families can't educate the kids because it's too taboo to talk about, but then also like within the education system they're also not being educated, so their only kind of education source is like the pornography, which is obviously incredibly problematic.
And they have no context for that pornography. They don't know it's not real. They think that's real.
Yeah.
They think everything they see is real, and they've got no context. So, you can imagine what an accident waiting to happen that is,
Yeah.
I mean, from my observation here in the UK, Angie, is what we're seeing from Lee's generation is the taboo around reporting sexual violence and talking about it is far less than our generation. There is a shift going on culturally in relation to understanding the issues. Still challenging, but they're much more willing to come forward. So when I first started to engage with signposting or using a mobile telephone and a leaflet handed out in community centres, majority of calls were for people in my age group, really, the kind of 50s and 60s, from males who were ringing up and females who were ringing up. But there were very few people in their 20s. And now, especially males, and they didn't want counselling. They would be like, "Oh, I don't want counselling, mate. I don't do that stuff." Now, the first thing anyone says to you is, "I want counselling." And what you then also what's happening, we're seeing more and more early 20s coming forward. So there's a shift. I think the issue that you illustrate what's going on in Cambodia as well about access to all this material that floods people in relation to sexual content is that there is no context to them for young people, and there's a report that says you can talk to the average 9-year-old and ask them what they've seen on the internet in relation to sexual content here, and every single one of their hands will go up and say, "Oh, yeah, I've watched tons of that." So they're kind of watching, and to expect them not to be watching it is truly naive. They don't, and they can process it, but they're processing it in ways that they're yet to play out, I suspect. Young people are very smart. In my day, in your day, the worst kind of material that you would see in a pornographic kind of context would be some old porno mag that'll be handed around in the school playground and stuff. Someone's satchel. That was all that existed. So, it would be Playboy would be an exciting, piece of material for the boys in the playground.
Well, so I mean, it was just nonsense what we were watching, or what we had available to us at that time. And it's just extraordinary now.
And it's again, use Neve's generation as an illustration, really, is where Neve will talk about it, I'm sure, and we'll go back to the wider conversation about society and sexual violence and harassment in all its forms. Is that it's not just the consumption of information now from the internet, visual, wherever, that can be had by the youngest of children. It's the fact that they're now beginning to externalize those processes into their own communications between themselves. So you get, the dick things being passed between phones without you even knowing where that's coming from, I'm told. It's also running into the idea that, there's always been, I suspect, spiking. I'm sure that's always gone on, but now it's almost an industrial scale inside clubs.
Really?
So it's like it is, it used to be always watch out for it. So because even in the 70s and 80s, there were warnings about it. But now it seems almost industrial. It's almost like it's default for what will happen inside those spaces. So young women and young guys in certain contexts have to be constantly monitoring what's going on in those spaces, because there are people who it's now become a kind of very clear cultural behaviour to spike other people to obtain gratification, often by sexual assault.
Wow.
Which is scary, isn't it? Because when we go back to the conversation that 20 years ago, we thought we were pushing, the culture to the place where it was finally going to deal with all of this. And whilst it's moved on massively, and there's I'm a cynical optimist, as I tell Neve, what makes us smile, that I think we would be unfair to say it hasn't shifted. I think there's been major shifts, major improvements. The conversation is much easier. You're seeing young people much more willing to disclose, much more willing to kind of, to be very open about the fact that the issue needs to be dealt with. That's males and females. But we're still reaching some kind of barrier in relation to system decision makers.
Well, it'd be nice to hear what Neve's got to say on that, because, it's good that everyone's got this awareness, but it sounds like, a lot of this predatory behaviour has become normalised. Is that your take on it, Neve?
I think that when environments change, no matter the context of that, things always learn to adapt. And I think that's what we're seeing. I think that's what the spiking situation is as well. I don't know if it is as severe as it was. A couple of years ago, it was really, really big in the UK around freshers. It was my second year at university, and there was a huge increase in spiking around this kind of 6-week period. It was insane, the levels that it went to with like injection, and I think that is kind of a result of the learning to adapt. It's like finding another way, a new way to kind of take advantage of people, finding a way to kind of get around barriers that have been there. Because, like, for example, club culture, I think, was getting to a point where, I mean, it was all still very much on girls and women and victims to kind of take responsibility. Don't drink too much, make sure you stick with your friends, make sure you do this, do that, get a taxi home safely. And but there was a lot more awareness, and I think people were I know, going out myself, I was always aware of my safety. So then, like, the spiking came in because that was something that no one like, you'd heard of it happening, but it wasn't on the scale that it wasn't when it got to that point. So and I have friends now that are still so apprehensive about going out because they're so scared, because that is completely out of your control. Apart from, like, you can get like cup covers, but if someone's going to inject you with something, there's not really anything you can do to protect yourself from that.
No.
So I think definitely there's always going to be predators, and they're always going to learn to adapt, because that is how they get whatever gratification they get from life. So I think it's kind of navigating how to adapt that. But another thing I do think is really interesting is that in the UK we still have the same issue with pornography as well, and how kind of like across the world, I think pornography is a huge issue, especially because of how explicit it is. And a lot of it perpetuates kind of violence against women. Like, you get in
the
pornography films, showing women being abused essentially and enjoying it. And then if there's no sex education and no context, like you say, to kind of say, well, this is like a performance, this isn't real, then people do just see that and they're like, oh yeah, that's what sex is. That's what a woman's role is in that relationship. And that is a global thing. So it's interesting I would say that is currently one of the biggest issues for violence against women in like a relationship context or like sexual violence context, because
it is
and it's like, it doesn't seem like any community is able to kind of get control of that and get a grasp on that. I mean, the UK, they're trying to stop sex education in primary schools at the minute, so
I know. Whenever the government gets involved, it's like, oh God help us, because they always take a hammer to crack a nut, don't they? There can never ever be any middle ground, can there? What we know from listening to survivors, especially young survivors. We used to get a lot of calls in rape crisis from children and young kids. Was the sex education that alerted them to the fact that the thing that's happening to them is not normal. This isn't happening to everyone. This isn't love or whatever they were getting in school. It alerted them to the fact that this wasn't right and they should talk to someone about it. So incredibly valuable, really, really important stuff. There's some really interesting things going on, in Cambodia. One, young boys in Cambodia are sexually abused from babies, from birth. Their genitals are petted, caressed, soothed, even sucked, from a very, very young, from babies, to calm them down, to soothe them, right? And when it's part of the training that First Step do, who does it? Anyone and everyone, usually a relative. What age does it stop? 4, maybe 8, maybe 12, you know. So when you're trying to talk about the sexual abuse of boys in Cambodia, very, very difficult, very, very taboo subject, because they're getting abused, sexually abused from, and it's very embarrassing for the male social workers in the room. That's who we're training, because this has been their experience. And now we've got to talk about it. And they have to go out into the community and conduct those sessions about this. You know, because when they ask boys, how do you feel about it? Guess what? Surprise, surprise. They're not happy about it. They don't want it to happen. They want it to stop. You know, the research is there, very clearly saying that. So, you know, so boys can't be victims. And anyway, you know, you've got the very strong gender roles as well. So, literally, you know, we've worked with people who are taking care of boys and girls, and it never occurred to them that boys have got feelings. You know, boys have got feelings, and that they've got to be kind and nice and treat the boys like the girls, and you know, and be gentle with them, and not make them cry and stuff like that. You know, so you know, terrible kind of contradictions going on. And left to their own devices a lot, you know, and as you know, if they're surrounded by that kind of stuff over there, you can imagine they're happy to escape to anything over here, you know. And no one giving them any context on anything that they're seeing, you know. And so, you know, from that, and you can, you know, that it's improved now, but you can still go into communities where, you know, the homes are quite open, some of them, or a coffee shop is quite open in a village, and they've got pornography on the TV, you know. They just kind of, you know, people are gathered around, the kids, you know, and they're watching porn in the open space in the community and so on. But you know, I've just done some training with social workers on pornography, and they were really fearful. They've never had this training before, and like, why not? Why not? If most of the children that they're working with who are displaying sexually harmful behaviours are using porn or seen it, or it's influenced their behaviours, why on earth haven't the social workers had training on pornography? Right? So now what you've got now is a situation where the male social workers will have seen pornography, so they know what they're talking about when the kids are saying. But the women, whoa, you know, I mean, you know, they get challenged at home because now they can name parts of the anatomy, their vagina, their penis, you know, that makes them a bit of a bad woman, right? That they're going out into the world and using those words, and they absolutely haven't seen pornography, unless, you know, someone's sent them flashes of it. So they're really fearful because they thought I was going to bombard them with porn, you know, in the training session. No, you know, I'm just going to I'm going to give you some perspectives on it, and you know, and yeah, the majority of it is violence against women. You know, and it's incredibly harmful, incredibly harmful. So I don't know, you know, it's important that we talk about this because, you know, I know through the work that we did in Rape Crisis, that as young men were accessing more and more porn and more, you know, it gets progressive, they need more violent, more taboo stuff. The girls who were calling us, you know, it had gone from sexual assaults and rape to torture and kidnap and, you know, gang rape and, you know, the stuff that was being, you know, porn was being reenacted, you know, on these young girls, you know, and that was, you know, what was that, 15 years ago? maybe, more than that, when I was still working on the helpline, you know?
So I think need picks up on a really, really important. The responses, because this is, the word is overused, isn't it? Complex. And we've been in events. We were in an event the other day with Neve, and we were at an event nearly 15, 20 years ago, where we were talking about to the NHS about stuff, and the resistance to the issues, Angie, are so deep rooted. When I was speaking the other day, reminded me back and what you're talking about with the social workers and their kind of fear and stuff. And I was asked, we found it really, they said there are a lot of agencies there. And the question was how do we engage with male survivors in this case? How do we engage with them when our services are so hard to engage with? And my answer was, well, they're not that hard to engage with. It's how you engage with them. And the first thing you can do is turn the lights on and actually not hide in the corner if somebody kind of mentions it. Kind of say, yeah, sure, let's go and have it. Put posters on the wall, kind of break them. I've always believed in challenge the silence, not break the silence. Not that someone has to break it in some secret coven somewhere where they kind of have to be, secretive. It's kind of, he's got to be safe and all the rest of it. But turn the lights on. And I would argue.
Totally. Do you remember the Savvy report?
Rob? I do. I quote it, and people look at me with what is that? They have no idea what it is.
It was a formative report, wasn't it? Really important. Stats on sexual abuse and violence in Ireland. And for me, the biggest issues that came out of that, the figures were astounding.
Indeed,
but the majority of people who spoke to the researchers from the university, and I think it was Dublin Rape Crisis, wasn't it? It was a joint endeavour. They spoke to a lot of people. And so many of them, the majority of them, had never, ever spoken to anyone about their sexual abuse before. And the main reason why, when they were asked, why have you never spoken to anyone? Because no one ever asked.
Yeah.
And, that just runs up your spine, doesn't it?
Sure,
all of these people presenting with all of these different traumas throughout their lives, and no one is asking, what's underlying this? What's happened to you, Didn't happen. And I remember, this is when we were very actively campaigning with the Survivors Trust, and we were working with the Department of Health. And at that time, survivors were in mental health institutions all over our country, male and female. And as part of the intake, the assessment, the practice, they were never once asked if sexual abuse had been part of their history. It's like just astounding.
Sure.
And and that's what we were trying to do, is just, well, can we ask? Can we get that question in there? Oh yeah, but then people have got to respond, and it's very true. People do have to respond, because if you're going to ask about that question, were you sexually abused, right? Like you say, Rob, a survivor is going to know within 5 seconds whether they can talk to you or not, right?
Sure.
And that's what they used to be doing when they called us on the helpline. I'm sure they're doing it with you now. They're sussing you out. They're testing you.
Yeah.
What do you know? Can you talk about it? Do you feel confident to talk about it? Am I going to traumatize you? These are all of the questions that survivors are asking themselves. Can you handle what I'm going to tell you? In the same way that, we were going into meetings, in multi-agency meetings. Can these professionals in this room handle what we are going to tell them about what we're working with? But the survivors are doing that, and they can suss you out in 5 minutes. And if they've got you down as a flake, they're not going to talk to you anyway. They'll shut up and go away. So that first response, of someone who can confidently hold that disclosure is absolutely critical, isn't it?
Sure, yeah. I mean, for us, we must bring back to the activism bit, and we've met, we've kind of lots of government ministers over the years, haven't we, Angie? So,
We
you
have
know,
indeed.
rolling how many we kind of roll the ball in and
God
gone to the
damn.
Department of Health, £1 million research projects into routine disclosure and how to work with sexual violence within the system and stuff. That's 20 years ago. What amazes me is that I still go to meetings, and it's like they ask the same question over and over again. And you say, well, that's all the knowledge. They say, we need more research, and we need to have this, and we need to have more research, and we need to have more research. And you say, well, actually, the research is endless, and it will come to the same place. And it's the same place as all you gets to. You need to do what you just described, which is you need to have first engagement. That's very safe, very validating, give confidence to the survivor, make them safe. Then you need to help them process the experience. Then you need to help them to integrate it, so then go back into the world. Into the world. If you sit them in a box called person-centered forever, they still have to go back into the world. And you don't want to create dependency. You want to create independence. You want to validate and empower so that people can empower themselves to actually live a good life. And that's all it is. It is not rocket science. And they look at you as if you're coming from another planet. That's my experience, is if it can't be that simple. And it is that simple. But it
It
changes power,
is.
doesn't it? Because the power
It
has to be
is.
to the survivor. It's not you as the expert. It's the survivor who's the expert. All you are is the guide, as Alice Miller would have spoke about many years ago, which is, you walk
Yeah,
alongside.
facilitating the process and showing that you can hold them. Interesting. I've been doing for the last couple of years now a real deep analysis of um, what is out there in terms of the work that people are doing with, young people sexually harming other young people, right? Because we hear about it a lot, um, and and if you look, you will find lots of guidance, and especially in Europe, America, and Australia, lots of multi-agency responses, risk assessments, treating these young people who are, often very damaged and they've been harmed themselves in many, many ways, as criminals, and thankfully we seem to be moving along the road to try to treat them holistically, you know, knowing that, let's, make sure there's protection and prevention going on, but just integrating them into life, and some of the evaluations about what worked was not necessarily the person that was working with them, the social worker, the therapist. It was another trusted adult in their life. It was getting back to their social life, football, back integrating, and often getting a romantic relationship, work, the normal shit that they never had before the intervention. But what's really, really interesting is that when you're trying to look at, okay, all right, we've got all the risk stuff and we've got evaluations of programs, but what is it they're actually doing? What are those interventions? What is step one with the child and with the parents and the caregivers? What do you do first, and what's second and third and fourth? There's nothing. There may be some things, one or two things, but you've got to pay for it, like the NSPCC training. Um, maybe one or two others, but there's nothing. So the stuff that we've been developing here in Cambodia is unique. It's absolutely unique, and that's what I'm telling them. It's like, we are capturing from the social workers the interventions. This is what we do, and when we see this challenge, we do this thing, and that's what we're capturing, and and it's gold. It's gold dust, really. And we will share it. You know what I mean? And we won't be selling it either. But of course, it comes from the Cambodian context, because you don't expect to turn up to a family in the UK as a social worker trying to support the family, to keep the boy out of prison, maybe, and get chased down the street with a machete. But that could happen to you in Cambodia, until they know you and trust you. And it has happened to the social workers. So
Here, the county lines thing really focuses the authorities' attention because it's all driven by drugs and the exploitation of young people. We're in that, though. What emerged in a conversation sometime not so long ago was the term survivor perpetrator for children. And, what I pointed out to them is, clearly, perpetration of any form of harm or exploitation by a child on a child is not good. But however, if you're talking about children, you've got to be very careful. So the language you use around the context of the interventions, because if you are projecting to them, you want to stop the behaviours. You need to understand where they're being driven from, especially in an exploitation context like county lines, basically drug mules working for the organised crime.
Yeah,
Is that you start, because they are going to perpetrate against each other on all sorts of levels, including sexual exploitation. But if you at that age, if they're adults, then clearly you have a different kind of lens in which you have to approach it. But if they're only 12 or 13 and they're if you start calling them perpetrators as well as victims, they'll pick up on that, and they're not going to come forward. They're not going to seek your intervention. They're going to resist it because they won't see themselves that way. So you've got to be very careful about language if you want to engage. And they were struggling with the conversation because they were saying, well, how do we engage? How do we connect to them? How do we get onto their level? And I said, well, start thinking about the language you use. Because clearly you want to start the behaviours, because the behaviours...
start,
But if you go in the way already puts them as the bad people when they're actually experiencing the bad stuff themselves as well, you're not gonna stop the downstream outcomes. But even if they stop perpetrating, they're going to have all the psychological...
And when you're looking at the literature, it's a lot of it is criminal justice responses. Risk assessment for related to criminal justice responses. Thankfully, here in Cambodia, we, unless it's really, really serious, there's a whole different justice system. The police are rubbish. They don't get paid enough to do their job. And it's a compensation system. So, the biggest burden on the child displaying the behaviours will be the fact that their family have to compensate the victim. Not a lot of money, but a lot of money in their lives. $100, $150, something like that. That's a month's salary. So community reconciliation and mediation and support and it's critical because the systems aren't there. We don't have a multi-agency response here. It's a community response, of how you're going to sort this out in the community. Simon Hackett, he does the best work on it. I really I draw upon him a lot. I read a piece he did recently, and he was the one who was evaluating the long-term outcomes and what was working, and loved it. I've never met him, but I really admire his the way he looks at it, frames it, and writes about it and recommends on it. And thankfully, he seems to have quite a lot of influence on practice in the UK. So but he probably doesn't know it, but he's influencing practice here in Cambodia as well.
I think one of
Interesting, huh?
I mean, some people in the system, we used to call them institutions, kind of. I think they're getting it. I think you can't arrest your way out of sexual violence. You can't change certain things unless you pull other levers. You know policy and strategy better than most people around sexual violence stuff. It needs an entire. As Theresa May said it to me in a meeting, because it needs an entire societal approach. It can't just be one element of the system. It needs to be systematic within the system and integrated. And everybody's but it all devolves back into silos. And I think survivor activists, let's come back to the activism, are out there really pushing. Next generation is coming beyond us. And Neve's a generation that's have kind of tried to change things in universities around the harassment that many students experience in those environments. Rape crisis is out there ploughing, massive push into kind of changing criminal justice system now. Kind of saying, kind of come to a view that I've held for a long time, that you should get rid of juries and have judge-led kind of processes, and they're going to have to do that, I think, just to clear the backlog of cases. So all of those things. But activists are out there
I
doing.
mean, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and there's been, over the years, there's been some lovely, holistic approaches to, that people have come up with for, addressing sexual abuse. Trying to give space for people who are feeling like they might perpetrate to speak out and, get support and prevent them from doing that. Back in the day, Bernardo's and the Lucy Faithful Foundation and so on. And, there were, quite whole system approaches that they were looking at. But, a lot of it is kind of piecemeal, isn't it? And it so seems to depend on personalities, on people who are going to drive it and people caring and people having a passion about it. I don't know. I sometimes I despair.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I don't do this. I used to do despair many years ago, but I kind of burned through despair. So that's why I use cynical optimism. I mean, I do kind of suddenly, I do feel almost like I mean, I think the younger activists who are emerging, and I say, well, I've been around for 25 years, you can see them rolling their eyes, but it's like the old man in the corner of the pub telling you you don't know how things work and that kind of stuff. So I kind of get it.
Fair enough.
But also you want to warn them that actually changing the system, changing the way it sees things and the people in it see it and getting them to care, we've moved on, but we aren't even anywhere close, I don't think, to really shifting the culture. And that these systems will take advantage of you, exploit you, they will use you, they will do all these things. On good days, you'll get really good people who are kind of trying to engage with you. But often they have their own agendas, and you may not be aware of them. And we've learned that the hard way over the years, haven't we, by engaging with all sorts of
Well,
stuff.
we do, and you're a man, I'm a woman. You've dealt with, I mean, we've been fortunate, haven't we, that we've worked together and spent time together with male and female survivors together, right? But like you say, women need their own spaces. Sometimes men need their own spaces to be able to, talk about the things that they're not going to be able to talk about and we're lucky in that respect. But I'm a woman, and I'm watching what's happening at the moment, and I see a lot of what I think is happening, because the levels of misogyny that I'm witnessing now, the minimization of the needs of women It's like we're not even equal human beings. I'm really watching this in the West. Women are worth less here in Cambodia anyway. But I'm a white woman, so I'm up there in the hierarchy. Um, to me, it's a real backlash to the Me Too movement, right? Me Too happened, and we called out and we challenged, and this is the backlash. And I think about all of the different social movements that I've seen and witnessed and been part of over the years, right? And it's unfortunate to have to say that nearly every single one I've been part of or witnessed, festivals, um, anti-Nazi marches, Red Wedge, the Labour stuff. Yeah, that was all me. That was my, I was part of that activism. There was always left-wing men trying to exploit women, sexually exploit them at festivals, in at the gigs. It was almost like, some of them probably were decent human beings, but a lot of them, they weevil their way in to these movements. We saw it, what was it, the financial protests in the States, what was that, 10 years ago, when they were all camping out, and women were getting raped en bloody mass in these demonstrations, in those tents at night. And those guys that we thought were our allies, the Labour Party under Corbyn, just rubbish, And I hate to say it, but a lot of the gender ideology stuff that tramples on women's rights. These left Labour men, these lefty men, Billy Bragg and Owen Jones and all of them, they love it. They love it because it's just another great opportunity to stamp on women. So, there's also that perspective from the female side, is that, you know, given the opportunity, they they will exploit and diminish women and girls.
I
If they
mean,
think they're going to get away with it.
Need may rather have a very current view from her generation. Yeah.
I think that people are becoming very polarized and very almost radicalized in their opinions. I think we've seen that just with political parties, to be honest. You're getting people that are really, really radically on the right, really radically on the left. And that's causing a lot of tension.
Yeah.
Just generally politically, there's a lot of tension, I think, around a lot of issues that genuinely do feel like we have regressed. I'd say in the past 5 years, when you look at the difference probably between the views of even the Conservative Party, their stances have shifted quite drastically. I do think that the feminist movement is a complex space, not just for women but for men too, because they don't know how to fit into it. You do get people that obviously are coming in and taking advantage of, we've all met men that have said all the right things and actually don't have the right intentions. But I think a lot of men also do find it difficult to place themselves within that context, because it's well, I do stand for the right things, I do support women, but I don't know how to do that, or feel personally victimized, because a lot of women as well are now taking a very anti-man approach, which is I think in a way natural, because if you feel kind of victimized by a gender, you're automatically going to take that kind of I hate all men kind of, and I mean, we've all said it as a joke, or but I think that's one thing I'm very conscious of at the minute, and that I've spoken with my friends about, is how it's almost alienating a lot of men too, because and then they kind of get more defensive, and then you get this kind of like drift, and it just splits it, and then it makes it even harder and harder and harder for you to move forward. I don't know what the right approach is to combat that, because you obviously do have large groups of men who either don't acknowledge the issue because they don't care, or they don't think it's an issue, or are incredibly problematic and do genuinely think that women are inferior. So it's a very difficult space to navigate. I think we're at there's just so much tension everywhere, I think, just across the board. So yeah, that's kind of my stance.
It's because we, with the internet as well, we just have so much more awareness,
Yeah. There's awareness, but there's also like misinformation as well. There's so much misinformation online, and people don't have we're not taught. I think because the internet is such a new thing as well, this amount of information that we can access instantly is not something that we've had for a long period of time, really.
No.
Especially young people being able to access that information too. And people don't know how to take information that they see, think about it critically, and then file it away in their mind. So many people publish information that looks credible, so unless people are going to take the time to go through everything they read and check that it is credible, they probably will just take it at face value and be like, oh yeah, that's so true. I know that I myself have done that in the past. I've seen something and been like, oh wow, like that, and it looks so credible. And then when I've actually researched it, it's like, no, that you've kind of cherry picked information from like a wider article or something. So it's very, very easy to manipulate people through social media, and I think that's another barrier that's kind of splitting people apart, because everyone's kind of consuming all this information, and they don't know how to critically read it.
No,
I think that's a huge
problem.
problem.
We have that times 100 here in Cambodia, because they, if you get a Cambodian education, you're actively discouraged not to critically analyze, not to question what your teacher's telling you. It's the people who've had been educated abroad, won scholarships to, get a master's in Australia. They're the ones who are, got some critical analysis. But in general, the general population is discouraged from, and that links into the hierarchical structures here. The people at the top have the knowledge, and people down there don't. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating, isn't it, Rob? Because we just didn't have that access, to that much information when we were growing up. The first time I sent an email was 2000. When I started working at Colchester Rape Crisis. So it's 24 years ago. It's not that long ago. And, every time I hear that it's YouTube's, 5th, 10th, 15th birthdays, whoa, really? You feel like it's been around forever, But it hasn't. It wasn't. It was never like that,
I think it's
we
I'll
have to
come
read
back
books and that.
So I'll come back to the feminism thing, because over the years, the internet, first of all, I'll come back to feminism. The internet, I couldn't have done all the things that I've done. I don't think what the changes that have been driven, in the United Kingdom in particular, would have happened as much as they've happened without internet stuff and
Mm.
knowledge and information, going all the way back to Savvy when it was published around 2000. I think that was quite a long time ago. So, but I couldn't have done with it. The internet freed a lot of my activism. Feminism, over the years, lots of people that you know are quite senior in Red Crisis, and have said that I'm a feminist, and I'm excommunicated from some male kind of groupings because they see me as some feminist kind of apologist, and I'm not. I'm not a feminist. I'm a humanist, but I really value the core of feminism, which is about liberation. As a survivor myself, I kind of understand almost innately for some reason that the only answer to all of this is liberation for all of us, which I think when you look at the foundations of feminist thought, and it goes back a long time, doesn't it, feminism? You can trace it back hundreds of years, and there's different schools of different kind of perspectives on it. But at the core of it, it's about liberating human beings from all this interpersonal violence and oppression through power and hierarchy, etc., etc. And it doesn't necessarily mean some nirvana of kind of some form of utopia. What it means is that's all achievable. It's like poverty could be. We could get rid of poverty tomorrow. We could do all sorts of things. I like Nick Lynch, the RMT union secretary, because I think he talks a lot of sense. We could do a lot of these things. We would just have to. So I'm an intersectionalist. I'm an intersectionalist. I like the work of Richard Reeves around boys and men, who I think is kind of really starting to explore how we start to find the solutions to all of this. Because if we just keep going around in circles, and it's kind of almost a cold gender war in some ways, I describe it, and we don't actually sit together and have our spaces of safety, have our spaces of mutuality, which is healing the healers in the context you were talking about, and the great value you still get from that. Nearly 20, it's actually 19 years is the one that you went to that happened. And you can still see the value you got from it. And so it's about having those. So I think it's about, this is my view, and I won't kind of go on forever about it, but my view is about turning the lights on the whole thing, turning them on at everything. And it's about having the conversations and having the space where services are properly funded, where there's none of this kind of funding wars going on, especially in sexual violence. Kind of having, enough, it's not going to ever be endless, but having enough, making sure you can meet the need, that it's meeting the need in a way that's consistent and has values and ethics. And also then it's about having a big conversation. It's how do we stop all of this? So who is in charge? Are you saying the culture's in charge and we'll just have to ride the storm? Or actually, the reality is we can change things, so we can manage it. So the next generations that are coming, we can start not being pushed back by self-entitlement often by people in all sorts of power positions. Males are the lowest, all levels of society, and females as well who abuse power, and exploitation of activists and young survivors in the context of movements happens for males and females. It happens in all sorts of activism contexts because of all sorts of issues. It's stopping the process for me. It's about how do we end all of this? How do we make sure this kind of doesn't just keep on evolving, that we actually start dealing with it? Because it's a virus that threatens our species in many ways.
Well, it's like you say, you were talking, it's a societal thing, in the work that I've done and explored, and you as well, we've seen really, really decent people doing great stuff, and changing, you read all the time about headmasters or headmistresses or teachers who've changed the whole culture in a school, those kids have gone from feeling like nobody gives a shit to feeling really valued and wanting to aspire in life, so we all know that those models are there. that, you know, youths who are neglected and abused, things can turn around for them. But, you know, it's about having those adults in their life who care and inspire and mentor and create different situations for them. You know, I was talking about Michael Conroy and Michael Flood and all of those wonderful men, highly motivated to, you know, get young lads to think differently about their culture, the lessons that they're taught, their peer groups, you know. You know, a lot of it is about gender conformity, isn't it? You know, and this is one of my problems with, you know, this whole gender stuff. It's like, you know, that I just want to smash the gender boxes and you know, let people be along those spectrums. Especially, you know, you really see it here in Cambodia. You know what those boxes do, and you know, when women like me are challenging those boxes, we're not just doing it for, you know, for women, so that we're not closed into, you know, every single caring and housekeeping and family care duty on top of the work that we're doing. We're helping men try and escape those gender boxes as well, you know, so they can cry, so that they can have feelings. You know, this is the kind of stuff we're talking about here in Cambodia. So, you know, there are wonderful people out there doing wonderful things. And, you know, it's about, I suppose it's about, you know, trying to gather the people together to form something bigger, you know, but they're up against a lot of negativity and hardship, you know, and hardship. You know, I've seen what's been going on in the UK, you know, with austerity over the years, the hardship, the poverty, the food banks. That creates discord and disharmony, division, and it's meant to. You know, you're meant to. You look around to see who you can blame. Don't look up. You know, don't look up at the people that are creating these situations. Look around and see who you can blame. You know, and we're seeing that. You know, I'm looking on Twitter. I look at many different accounts because I'm nosy, and I can see women rejecting Labour and talking about voting reform. For crying out loud, they're going to vote reform. You know, what the flying? What is going on? You know, I mean, I think desperate times, people move to the right. We're seeing it in France. We're going to see it in this election in the United Kingdom. You know, the other thing that I wanted just to mention as an aside is that we were talking earlier about the impact of collective trauma in Cambodia and, you know, how that. But the other thing is that the issue of childhood sexual abuse, it's not talked about really. And adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse is not even on the radar. When I was doing some research on the issue a good few years ago, the only Cambodian that I spoke to that knew the term adult survivor was a Cambodian who had gone to study in Canada, and she was a member of the Canadian Bar. And she started an NGO here, Legal Services for Women and Children. And she was the only one who even understood my question, because I threw it in as a question. What about adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse? And it's not even on the radar. Now, isn't that fascinating? And if you know anything about the scam compounds and the trafficking, slavery, and exploitation of people in Cambodia, Chinese, Cambodian, Indonesians, Indians, If you read the most recent trafficking report out of USAID about Cambodia, it's horrific, it's scandalous, it's happening in plain sight. Cambodia is the main hub of slavery exploitation and scam compounds in Asia. Last week, one Taiwanese and one Chinese fell off balconies in these scam compounds. We're living with slaves being tortured, and new compounds being built every day. So they're still doing it to each other. They're still what they, and it's really changed my perspective of Cambodia, watching all of this go on since COVID, and the Chinese left the casinos. They had to do something with these spaces. They had to generate money, and they've done it through scam compounds and pig butchering.
So that horrendous trauma that existed in those, most human beings cannot imagine. And the stories of how the horrors of just whatever you can think of is the worst you can think of that a human being can do to another human being. That was going on a daily basis on an industrial scale. And sexual violence within that, because that was clearly a major element of abuse and power. But then maybe there is a hierarchy in people's minds culturally that actually, when you look at the horrors that exist in death for people, the way they were killed by these fanatics, were like lost in this super cult in so many ways, wasn't it? Maybe that just kind of diminishes. But also is the cultural thing about diminishing it anyway. It's the unspeakable, as Herman, is famously, begins on our first page of a book, Trauma and Recovery. We are dealing with the unspeakable. And that's why you get the pushback. Got power as well and control, isn't it? About entitlement. But also it's about, for most people, it's about, this is too complex for me to deal with. This is not comfortable. I don't want to deal with it. And I don't want to have my Walt Disney view of reality around sort of shattered by, the truth.
No, and there's, there has to be, we were talking about awareness raising, and that happen that things need to be in place within a society for you to be able to discuss and start talking and thinking about the subject. This society here is squeezed and crushed on a regular basis, and they loosen the grip sometimes and then they tighten it again. So these people don't know whether they're coming or going. They can't buy land or property because they don't know if it's going to be taken off them. It's hard to explain the constant fear. I posted about this TTIP report that came out the other day about what's going on in Cambodia. And a Cambodian American living in America said, people can't talk about it. It's taboo. They're not really allowed to talk about it. Because I said, I tried to talk to my colleagues about it. Like, whoa, anyone concerned about this? Thousands and thousands of people shipped here, exploited, deceived, lied to, having to pay $5,000 ransoms to get home, often with a limb missing. Anyone concerned about this? And just deathly silence. I've just learned not to talk to my Cambodian colleagues about this, about what Cambodians are doing to other Cambodians and Chinese and whoever else is unfortunate to cross their path.
Maybe it's still so raw from the 70s that people just can't cope with the reality that it might be kind of happening. Still, they switch off for it. So it's psychological.
Well, the fear never went away. Half the government was Khmer Rouge.
Sure, yeah.
Half of the leaders were Khmer Rouge. you
Sure,
know,
yeah.
and they came back with you know, they fled.
Sure, yeah.
They came back with the Vietnamese and put
Okay.
in, you know, put the same systems and structures back in, took
Okay.
everything, you know, took everything, you know,
Yeah.
and they've created, and it's an incredible system that they've created here. You know,
Mm,
father kind of gets promoted up and the son gets his job, you know,
sure, yeah.
you know, tight elite, you know, with so much money. Google elite Cambodian weddings. You know, they've got like
Okay.
$200,000 flower budgets. These people, of course, they have,
Yeah,
because they're
yeah.
making millions and millions out of these scam compounds. You know.
But of course,
Anyway, I digress, don't I? I
all right.
digress, but
It's good to have these chats because it goes back to power, doesn't it? It's about power and who controls things and who
yeah,
decides
and that's
what's
what I'm saying. You
important.
know, about things need to be in place in the society for awareness. You know, for you to feel comfortable, raising awareness, feeling like you can have the conversation. You know, having a chat about, do you think this is fair and right? Um, yeah, a certain amount of stuff has to be in place, doesn't it? You know, and
It does, and so I'll ask one question. I'll answer it for myself. First of all, I'm optimistic for the future of change for sexual violence across the world. I won't be around to see it, and it's not kind of giving myself a cop out when I kind of think, oh, it'll be fine, because it's going to be a difficult journey. But I'm optimistic. So, how about you, Angie? What do you think the next 25 years is going to bring for the world around sexual violence in Cambodia and elsewhere?
yeah,
But
it's the young people. It's the young people that are inspiring me, Rob. To be honest with you, like I said, here in Cambodia, um, you know, the older women, and I'm saying 25, 35, they're not that old. They were too impacted by other stuff. It's the young women coming through, who it's not acceptable to them, and they can read more and find out more about this stuff. You know, they can make up their own minds and they can compare what's happening in their lives to the lives of other women around them. You know, and you know, I saw real, like, we're not having this. You know, and I thought, yeah. Um, I'm going to let you get on with it because I'm an old biddy, and you've got to do it in your own way. But the young people definitely give me hope because they've got more knowledge and more awareness, and knowledge is power. You know, knowledge is power.
indeed, yeah.
So, yeah. What about you, Neve?
I think young people are definitely more aware. I would say there's also like a lot less tolerance. I think a lot of young people are getting really
Mm,
frustrated now. I mean, you're just seeing
yeah.
that with like everything that's going on in the UK. But also I think I am personally inspired by you guys because I think it's like I would say when did I start Sasha, like 2021, so 3 4 years into my journey. um and I can already have moments where I'm just like, this just feels so massive and such a big mountain to climb, but then I
Mm,
see you guys have been doing it for so long, and that's inspiration that it's worthwhile, and
mm,
um the work, it's hard, but it needs to be done and it's valuable,
it
and
is.
it's worthwhile. So
Mm.
yeah.
Lovely. Yeah, I think, you know, back to what I was saying at the very beginning is like, you know, if we can just change help one person
Yeah.
and create a ripple effect around them, um, you know, they're going to go off and do the same, you know, and the ripples are happening all over the place, and that gives me hope as well, you know.
Yeah.
Just you know, just what you can do by changing one person's life, the impact that
Mm.
that can have. We've seen that many times, haven't we, Rob?
We have,
Um,
yeah.
you know, and that's what you do. You know, you change things one step at a time, one day at a time, one person at a time. You know.
Yeah.
Not going to convince everybody, but yeah, good. What a great conversation. I really enjoyed that.